Fundraising is hard. It's no secret that raising venture capital is not an easy thing to do, especially if you're a first-time founder and are learning all of this as you are building your very first company. And that's why I'm excited to sit down with Nathan Beckord. He's the founder of Foundersuite, which has built a platform that brings all of these various point solutions into one single platform so you can run an end-to-end fundraising process. We talk about what does that perfect fundraising process look like, as well as what typically happens and how, if you end up in that typical situation where you're not preparing and not doing the things that you necessarily need to do to fundraise, how you can still ensure that you have a successful fundraise. So it's a really fun conversation. And I'm excited to have Nathan on because he, prior to founding Foundersuite, has spent over 10 years working with over 150 startups as an interim CFO, business developer, and advisor. He's got his MBA in entrepreneurship, a BSc in finance, and is a Chartered Financial Analyst, CFA. And in his free time, enjoys sailing, traveling, and riding motorcycles. So I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Nathan Beckord, where we talk all about the perfect fundraise. Are you interested in growing and scaling your business? Welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast, where you'll hear from entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and top performers on what it truly takes to grow and scale a business. You'll walk away with actionable insights you can apply in your own business and life. Now to William Glass, the CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and your host of the Silicon Alley Podcast. Nathan, welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast. Excited to have you on today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, excited to dive in. What you do at Foundersuite is help people raise capital, and that is obviously a very big topic of conversation for majority of startup founders, and especially right now, given the market environment. So I'm excited to have you on today.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate
it. So I'd love to start before we dive into the meat and potatoes, so to speak. I'd like to get a little more context on what drew you into the startup world, and have you always been a founder? Have you spent more time on the investing side? Talk me through a little bit about your background and journey and how you ended up founding this company, Foundersuite.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, which is actually a pretty entrepreneurial place. Even it is today now, and it even was, back in the day. Even as a kid, I always had side hustles going on. I would rent out my motorcycle to other kids. I'd tell my mom I'm going out for a ride, and then I'd go bring a book and just sit on a tree stump while I rent the bike for $10 an hour to other kids, and stuff like that. So always had kind of just a hustle mentality. As a kid, I used to sell fireworks in the back of the Sacred Heart school bus and stuff like that, because kind of arbitraging. I had very permissive parents who would let me just do whatever. So I kind of arbitrage my permissive parents and more restrictive parents who wouldn't let their kids do stuff. And that was fun. But then after college, went down a path of investment banking, kind of got lured into that, glamorous world. I use air quotes around that. I mean, it is a glamorous world, but it's also pretty brutal and grinding. And did that for just a little while, helping companies raise capital, kind of got a taste of, of fundraising, really, both on the IPO side during the dot-com boom, and then afterwards spent a little time in JP Morgan's private placement group in New York there, and that was fun. That was helping later stage companies raise capital, and then came out to San Francisco and spent a decade helping really early stage companies raise capital. So that was kind of the journey, kind of hustler, investment banker, consultant, and then decided to build Foundersuite, which is software for raising capital. Kind of a natural evolution of that journey, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that context. And before we dive into the fundraising side and what you guys are doing at Foundersuite, I'm curious, what was that like? It sounds like, as you said, you arbitrage the fact that you had more permissive parents relative to the more restrictive ones, motorcycles, fireworks. What was that experience like, and how has that kind of influenced your journey?
Yeah, there was one other category in my product and service offering that was I would order stuff out of the back of Kung Fu magazine, which had all kinds of Chinese throwing stars and nunchucks and blowguns and things like that. I would order it, pay for it. It would deliver, then I'd mark it up heftily and sell it to other kids, right? All the illegal stuff that's not truly illegal, right? it was just fun. I mean, I think it's like that sort of like aha moment that both like older founders have and kids kind of stumble on sometime, like, wow, there's opportunity here. I can actually there's an opportunity I can exploit a little bit, right? And it's sort of, I don't know if you're aware of it as a kid so much as like, hey, look at what I'm doing. But it was exciting, right? I mean, I think that's why you're a founder, I'm a founder. It's that excitement of kind of get your adrenaline and pulse going a few notches, and it can make money too, right? My mom always was like, why do you have this jar of cash? Like, it's this huge jar stuffed of money. Like, where is this coming from? Of course, she's thinking the worst, which is probably drugs or something,
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, it's that thrill, right? It's that thrill of like discovering an opportunity and exploiting it.
Gotcha. No, that's yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And do you think that affected your risk appetite, right? Because let's be real, like, being a founder isn't the most stable job or career trajectory.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, whether it like influenced it or it was always there and you just sort of match it, right? It's a good question because I actually started my career at maybe in a public accounting firm called Arthur Anderson, which doesn't even exist anymore, but it was a 100,000 person firm that was doing accounting valuation services. I started doing like valuation, and that was the first job out of college, and that is like the seemingly safest career path ever, right? You get a job as an analyst, work your way up to associate after a couple of years, and you managing director, partner, right? And you just worked a very clear ladder. Well, guess what? Arthur Anderson collapsed, right? So what seemed to be the most stable company you could ever choose out of college is no longer around, right? So it's like risk, I think, is kind of squishy,
Yeah.
So yeah, you can choose the most safest career and still have that go away, or you can choose a startup and hustle your butt off and at least have a really direct influence on the outcome, which I think is what I like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, I'd love to fast forward now. You talked about Foundersuite and going, kind of blending what you learned on the investing side, the founder side, and this is a kind of putting all that stuff together, right, to create this business that you're building. So, talk to me a little bit about what Foundersuite does, and like what's the value proposition.
Yeah, so I left JP Morgan, kind of borrowed some of those tactics and philosophies, went out and was helping companies, so I took that playbook from JP Morgan's private placement group, went out to Silicon Valley, was helping companies raise capital, not as a broker dealer, more as a consultant. But what we would do is, like, if Ostrich was raising capital, we would get you in, we'd help build a financial model for you, we'd put together a pitch deck, we'd do the research and put together a list of 50 or 100 or sometimes even more investors that are relevant for you. And then we'd load them all up into this fancy spreadsheet and then kind of push you out of the nest and kind of coach you as you're talking to these investors. And that was fine, but it's still very manual. Like, that spreadsheet gets really messy, really quick. And so we just sort of had this idea, like, could we build tools for this? So, Mark Andreessen had that quote, "Software is eating the world," right? Which I thought, such a simple quote, but it like made the light bulb go off. I'm like, yeah, why are we making software for this, right? Every industry is getting, productized. And so that was sort of the light bulb. And so our first product was an investor CRM, basically a CRM tool to replace that spreadsheet and manage a pipeline. And then we basically just steadily added on to that every year, one or two products. We added a database of investors. We have like 200,000 investors in the database now. We added like pitch deck hosting, investor updates, documents, downloadable stuff, and then a data room is our most recent offering. So when you get into due diligence, you need a data room. So we're kind of just mapping out the steps of the funding process and building tools that help you do a better job for it. That's the value prop right there, basically.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know. Appreciate that, Nathan, and makes a lot of sense, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of point solutions, right? So when I was looking at Foundersuite, you've got the products that are just data rooms, you've got the CRM products, you've got the the Cartas of the world that like manage cap tables and things like that. So it's really interesting that you've sort of brought almost all these things in house, right? And like trying to make it easier for founders.
Yeah, totally. You're right. For every one, people ask me, who is your competitor a lot of times, and I'm like, well, we don't really have too many direct competitors, but for every product we have, there are several competitors. There's 50 plus CRMs. There's at least 5 kind of investor databases out there. Probably there's, there are hundreds of data rooms. I don't even know how many. So yeah, there's point solutions for everyone, but like, I think there is value in having everything integrated, woven together, because it's all interconnected, right? It's the CRM you're using to manage these investors, but the email tools and the pitch deck tools are your marketing, right? It's all connected. So I think there's a good value in having it kind of plugged into one suite. Yep.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm biased, but
Yeah. Well, talk me through, like, for founders that are listening, or folks that are raising capital for the first time, like, how do you get started? How do you approach that, right? Like, you've got an idea, hopefully you've done a little bit of work on it, but like, what do I do? Like, walk me through like a great fundraising process.
Yeah, okay, I will. I'll take now. This rarely. I'll tell you sort of the ideal optimal fundraising process. This almost never happens in real life. It's like 1% of founders do this, but I'll describe it anyway. A deal process goes like this. You're building something. You got to have something kind of fundable, or at least fundable in the future. If your thing's going to be fundable in the next year or two, this applies. If you're just idea stage, sketching ideas on a napkin, maybe not. Anyway, so let's say you've got something that's in motion, that's interesting, big market, all that good stuff. The best process ever it goes like this. Step 1, start to identify the right investors. And this takes a lot of time. When I was doing that consulting work, we would put in 50 to 100 hours of research building a target investor list for our clients, right? That's kind of what it takes. It's really heavy. Even with all the databases, even with our database, it's still very time consuming to put together a target list of investors. So that's step 1.
So
step
how do you, so before we just
yes.
Let's dive in there. So how do I know that, because this is something that I can attest to is very difficult, because someone just puts investor, it doesn't mean anything, or you see VCs that say we handle all of these stages, but in reality, they really focus on 1 or 2 stages, not the entire stack. So like, what are some of the things when you're like putting together this list that you should think through to like qualify potential investors?
Qualify is such the right word. I use it all the time. And we think of it like fun, not to go too off on tangent, but fundraising as a sales process, it really is. You're qualifying these leads just like you would if you're a salesperson qualifying your sales leads. Anyway, typically you start off doing searches. Foundersuite has this, Crunchbase has this, I think AngelList, all these databases have ways to search for investors, and you typically start by fintech or your industry, financial services, fintech, marketplaces, whatever your sort of core industry is. Start with that, and then usually filter down by type of investor. Are you looking for angels, VC, family offices? Kind of narrow that down a little bit. Sometimes by location, you might narrow it down a little bit too, because if you really want to stay local, that's another topic. But then you're going through each result, and like I think in fintech, I think we have like 8,000 results. There's a lot of results, but you can narrow it down a little bit, right? Then you're going through these results and you're looking for clues that they invest in your stage, that they're actively investing. And sometimes you have to go in different places to find this, that they have not invested in a competitor, right? Because that's a disqualifier instantly, that they are still in business, things like that. I mean, you're kind of making sure they're active, right? You're trying to find, maybe even clicking through to their webpage, obviously, to see if they've announced a new fund, look at their news and stuff like that. Because if they haven't announced a new fund in the last couple of years, they're probably either a zombie fund or, maybe trying to raise a fund now. So that's right. I mean, there's a lot of things you're trying to qualify for, but those are starting points. Right stage, right industry, filter a little bit by geographic location, because sometimes that's important. Yeah. Actively investing, and no competitors. And then you can also just look for other clues, like when you're on their social page, on their Twitter, seeing what they're talking about, right? That's always good. So that's why it takes a while. I tell founders, for each result you get on the search, plan to spend 20 to 30 minutes kind of clicking through the social links, digging into that investor and qualifying them. So yeah, that's why it takes a while.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. But that amount of work is actually really helpful, so you don't waste your time with somebody that has a competitive company in their portfolio, or they, to your point, are a zombie fund and they actually can't make an investment, but they're not going to tell you that because they're hoping they're going to raise their next fund.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, your time's being wasted and all that stuff. So that's really helpful. So thanks for diving in there, Nathan. So what is step 2? So we've got our list. We've got we're feeling confident. What's step 2?
So step 2 is my favorite little like jujitsu ninja hack or whatever. It's not reaching out to them saying, hey, invest in me. It's reaching out to them like months before, even up to a year before you plan to raise money, with a really soft email like, hey, William, I see you, I've been following you on Twitter for a while. I see you've done some interesting deals like XYZ. I'm building this really cool product in fintech space. We're pretty early still, launching, 2 months from now. I'm not raising capital right now, but we will be, in Q2 of 2023. We do a monthly update. It's super short. Can I have your permission to add you to my company update distribution list? So you're not pitching them to give you money. You're simply kind of asking permission to get in touch with them, build a relationship. And that's actually also good language to put in there. Looking to, just start relationship building now, well in advance. And I'd love to give you like early access or a sneak peek. Those are also good little phrases. Sneak peek of what we're working on here. And a lot of investors will be like, yeah, okay, fine, no problem. No harm in that, right? They're not really committing too much. You're not asking them to commit too much. And then you start doing it. You actually put a little, here again, perfect scenario. Not everyone does this. Block off 2 or 3 hours every month on your calendar. Make it a recurring monthly event to write an investor update, just with all the progress of your business. New product releases, any new deals, partnership deals, any traction, metrics if you have it. Talking about the team a little bit. I always like to put in like an actual photo of the product and how that's evolving, actual photo of the team so they can see who you are, because they don't really know you. This is still kind of a virtual relationship, right? But you start to send this update, multiple touch points. Mark Suster, who's a VC, has this great quote. It's like, investors invest in lines, not dots, right? And so you're creating that line by having multiple touch points. Now, even better if you can, again, this is the perfect scenario fundraise. Even better if you can, maybe you're local to that investor and you can say, hey, I'm thinking about this business model idea. Would you have 20 minutes to hop on a call? I know you're a fintech expert. Let me pick your brain for a minute on this. Or could I take you out for lunch, right? Even better if you can start building actual relationships with these investors. And if you built a list of, say, 100 or 200 investors, granted, a lot of them are maybe going to ignore you, but there's going to be some base, if you've targeted them correctly, that are probably going to be somewhat engaged, right? And so you're nurturing relationships with these. So continuing, any thoughts or questions on that sort of second step? I know there's a lot to it.
Yeah. So the relationship, like you said, building those relationships, that's that second step, and that can come in the form of the investor updates. So you mentioned a couple of things that are good, like key metrics, team, progress, picture of the product. Those are kind of the key things that you want to have in a really good update.
Yep. Yeah. So my update to prospective investors, I have 2 updates, 2 templates, I guess you could say. One to prospective investors, what we're talking about here. It's an overview about what we do, like 1 or 2 sentences. That's basically the same paragraph each update. It doesn't change much, right? Basically, what do we do? Just because there's going to be new people on the distribution list, or people have been sort of half tuning in and paying attention. So just reminding what you're doing. Second section is like key wins. What happened last month that's interesting and exciting? All the stuff we talked about, product updates, partnerships, press releases or press announcements, stuff like that. And then often a metrics tab or metrics section, maybe a product image. And then I have a looking ahead section, just a few bullets. Again, this is short. This is like a really short skimmable update. This is not a book, a little section on looking ahead, what's coming up next month that we're excited about. We're going to be, presenting at TechCrunch Disrupt or whatever, like what are some interesting things that's going on. And then a team photo at the end, maybe with any new hires, a little description on that. And that's basically it. So they can kind of see who you are, what you're doing, sort of where the traction is, and just connecting with the images connecting a face to a name and stuff like that, right? And that's basically all it is. And you can add other stuff too. If you're getting a lot of press, maybe you have a press section, right? Stuff like that. But that's a good MVP update.
No, I like that. And I like the team. That's not something I've heard of, like actually putting a picture of the team in there. So they actually associate the name to a face, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, this is marketing. I mean, really, we're just doing marketing. And like any brand building, right? Any good company building a brand, Coca-Cola is putting their logo in front of you multiple times. That's kind of the same concept here. So, all right. So we go on to the next step, I guess.
Yeah, let's go on to the next step.
The ultimate perfect fundraising. I'd say next step is, let's say, kind of have a target date for kicking off a fundraise. And let's say it's February of 2023, right? So you've got plenty of time to sort of nurture these relationships in advance. I'd say in December-ish, start building a pitch deck, maybe even sooner. And because it takes multiple cycles to really get your pitch deck just like amazing. And one of the people ask me, like, what's top reasons startups fail at raising capital? Probably number one is their pitch deck is not good. It's crappy and confusing and cluttered and doesn't tell a good story and all that stuff, right? That it has to do. So give yourself plenty of time to create a really good pitch deck. Give yourself plenty of time to not only create it, but to pitch practice with other founders, with attorneys, with accountants, with any friendly VCs. Maybe someone from college who's now a junior associate at Sequoia or whatever. Practice your pitch 10, 15, 20 times before getting out there talking to investors. So you're really polished and prepped. I'd also say maybe start to get a data room together. This means so when investors get into terms discussions, they're going to want to go into due diligence with you, and they're going to want to get access to tons of stuff. That's like incorporation documents, your financials, historical financials, often projected financials as well, customer references, personal references, intellectual property, if you have any patents. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that goes into a data room that investors are going to want to see. And it's really great. Again, this is the perfect world scenario if you build out this data room before fundraising, because you don't want it to slow down the process because you haven't built a data room, right? You get investors excited, they're hot to trot, but whoa, you've got to spend a month like assembling all this stuff. That's going to slow things down. And deals run on momentum, right? So get your pitch deck together, probably a financial model like we talked about, get your data room together. And then I'd say, what step are we on? Third or fourth is really getting your connector army all teed up. And that means kind of identifying who to ask for intros to these investors that you've been targeting. Now, some of them you probably have a little relationship with already, and you can go direct to those investors because you did that email permission thing, but others you're going to need to get an intro to. Seeing if you have any connections to them on LinkedIn or, putting the word out. If not, trying to build some intros to those founders, reaching out cold to some startup founders they've invested in, right? So let me clarify this situation. You've maybe got 10 investors on your list. You have no direct connection to them, no mutual connections to them that you can find on LinkedIn. They haven't actually responded to your permission email, but they're really good investors for you. Look at what each investor on that list has invested in the last 12 months or so. Cold email those founders basically and kind of break the ice. Like, hey, I'm in this space. This is what I'm doing. You can take a couple different approaches. You could say, would you have 10 minutes to give me some advice on my pitch deck? Or you could get some advice on that investor. Hey, I see XYZ investors put money into you. What's he like to work with? Has he been really active or helpful, or more of a passive investor? Like, could we hop on a quick Zoom and talk about it? And a lot of times those conversations will lead to that founder offering to intro you to that investor, right? So whatever step we're on, let's call it 4, is building kind of the connection paths to those investors on your target list. All right, I'll take a pause. Any comments or questions on that?
Yes. There's a few different things, right? You cover step 3, really honing the pitch down, practicing, refining it, getting feedback. That data room, which is definitely important to get, right? So financial model, corporation documents, trademarks if you've got them, all the employee contract,
Yeah, I forgot
contractor,
that.
all that kind of stuff. And then connectors. So what do I, if I don't have a big network, Nathan, like what do I do? Is it just I'm SOL? Like I don't have a bunch of people that can intro me.
Yeah, and this is really common, right? And that's where, again, starting all of this stuff early, like months before you need to or plan to raise money, that's why you need a good, strong lead time. Because let me sidetrack for a minute. We have a podcast called How I Raised It, and it's interviews with founders, and we should get you on there, but it's interviews with founders on how they raise money. And at least half, maybe more like 3/4 of the people on the show had no real network in the startup venture community when they went out. And so what do? They kind of did that same approach I just talked about of networking with other founders. Now, if you're in a accelerator like Y Combinator, there's already some built-in advantages. You have this alumni network you can reach out to, but you can still kind of create that network pretty quickly by, hustling and networking with other founders, especially in your space, right? Here's one example, right? There's tons of ways to do this. There is that like cold email approach I just described. Let's say you're in fintech and you're in New York City, and something we actually did a little of this, put on an event, fintech networking mixer, whatever, right? And get us a couple speakers from the venture world, from, your top 3 interesting venture speakers from fintech, and then, run some ads on Facebook and Google and put the network out there to fintech founders that for $20 they can come, here and mingle and have hors d'oeuvres and stuff like that, right? Throw a little mixture, and that's a great way to like get to know all the people in the room, right? I mean, this doesn't actually take that much work to put on a little 50-person mixer, So there are multiple ways to hustle and build that network that is really helpful for you.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's really clever, Nathan. Yeah, I like the event, right? And then also when you're hosting something, people just assume that you are smarter or more well connected than you normally are, is what I found. Which obviously that grows as you host more and more events. But that's, yeah, I really like that.
Man the door or staff the door. That's probably a gender. Staff the door, right? Greet everyone who comes in. When your speaker investor VIPs come in, obviously usher them aside and kind of get them prepped, get some water, chat with them a little bit, introduce yourself, to familiarize yourself. Maybe you be the moderator. This is what I used to love doing this. We haven't done events in a while, but I would always be the moderator of the panel. And so I'm up there on stage with the investors. I'm not an investor, but I'm kind of on the same stage with them, right? And that's kind of a nice thing to do. So yeah, a lot of ways to kind of hustle and network that.
So what comes next, Nathan? So we've got our intros, we set our date. Like what happens next? We start pitching? Is that the next step?
Yeah, basically. So the curtain goes up and we call on all those intro sources, all our connectors to be making the intros. Actually, one other thing to do. If you've been doing that investor update process I talked about, let's say, again, we're raising money starting in February 2023. In your January investor update, put a little thing up top there, right in that overview section, maybe in caps, I don't know, do whatever you want, in bold. We're going to be kicking off our seed round next month. Let me know if you would like early access to our pitch deck and data room. Put that in there, kind of a soft little call to action, like a month before you're actually planning to raise your round. And hopefully you've built this great distribution list of, call it 200 investors. Maybe 100 of them are opening your updates every month. Maybe 50 of those are, spending 5+ minutes reading, or 3+ minutes reading it. So hopefully you have some engaged community there. And then of that 50 that are reading it 5 minutes a month, maybe 20 of them say, sure, send me your pitch deck before you go out, circulating this, because you're, again, giving them kind of early access to your deal. And great. And I've seen deals actually stop right there. So before you as the founder go out hustling and pitching, 5 of those 20 investors said, I want to lead this, put me down, let's preempt this, right? And I've seen deals like get preemptively funded before even going out. And it's like the most easy fundraise ever for founders, because they don't have to go out and have 4 months of meetings, 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
Okay. So, right. I don't know what percent that works, but I've seen it happen multiple times. So, but let's assume that doesn't happen to you. You don't get preempted. You ask all those connectors to make those intros basically the same time frame. And you try and really pack in a lot of investor meetings in a pretty tight time frame, like as many as you can handle per week. And really, you're trying to get you're trying to do two things. You're trying to get momentum going for your deal, so there's interest from multiple parties, and you're also trying to, just kind of run a process and have like a timeline that this thing executes to, where you're meeting with all interested investors in weeks 1 and 2, and then this is maybe a little aggressive, but again, perfect world scenario, weeks 2 through 4, it's like second round meetings, and then weeks 5 through 6 is diligence, term sheets following after that, right? You're having a really tight timeline. Now, again, this doesn't really happen that much in real world, but that is a perfect goal to have.
Got it. No, I love that. So that's perfect. Here's exactly how you run a really tight fundraising process. What do you see actually happen? Which steps break down? And I know I teed you up, right? We talked about the perfect one, but that was really just so that we could really figure out what happens in the real world, right? And how do we actually still get the deal done, even if we don't plan a year in advance, or we don't plan even 6 months in advance, and we plan 3 weeks in advance, or whatever the the time frame is.
This would be a good cartoon, or almost like a the vision and the reality, right?
Yeah.
I think in the real world scenario is okay, we've got this off the ground. Oh crap, look at our bank account. We've got to go raise some money now. Let's slap together a pitch deck. Let's, start emailing everyone hey, do you know any investors I can talk to? Almost kind of a very shotgun scattershot approach. A lot of founders are like, I need to raise money. Can you connect me to anyone? Is there anyone in your network? Versus the sort of more targeted approach that I described as the perfect scenario. People take a more scattershot approach. People sometimes, start spamming investors, right? There's 6,000 fintech investors in Foundersuite. They try and grab all the emails and, just start blasting, even though some of them are not relevant for them because of their stage focus or whatever. But some of that still works, right? So I'd say the more realistic scenarios, you slap together a pitch deck, you go into hustle mode, you just start really trying to get intros everywhere you can. And then assuming some of that leads to interest, you'll slap together a data room, you'll gather up all this stuff and kind of wing it as you go and hope you can just pull it off on the skin of the teeth. And a lot of people do, right? If you've got a really interesting business, crazy good metrics, a lot of the stuff gets easier, even if you don't run this perfect process, right? Because investors see your metrics oh, holy crap, this is going through the roof. Let's jump in on this. And investors, you can kind of tell if investors are, socializing your deal with other investors, you can tell you've got a hot deal and they're kind of excited about it, right? You're yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't give much context to the way people often do it, but it's almost the opposite of everything we did. Most people don't do that investor update pre-warm up thing. A lot of people actually will do it on the second round. Maybe they didn't do it for their seed round, but now they know, and they also have investors that they can kind of engage for future intros, so they'll start to do that a little more. So I think people do kind of learn, after that first round, that maybe they pull together by skin of their teeth.
That makes sense. What are some of the biggest mistakes, pitfalls, right? So as you said, everyone kind of ends up running it differently. Very few people actually run the perfect process. What are some of the big things that if you're a first-time founder raising, you should just absolutely avoid, because it's gonna stop your fundraise in its tracks kind of thing?
Yeah. A lot of good stuff. I mentioned already, but having a bad pitch deck, the bar is really high. You're out there talking to investors. Each of those investors is talking to 30 startups a week, sometimes more. Sometimes it's 50 startups a week. I mean, they're seeing a lot of deals. They're getting a lot of intros coming at them. They're getting a lot of pitch decks coming at them. So your pitch deck has to be exemplary and amazing. So I'd say that's really number one. Your story is just not good. I'd say, I also mentioned this briefly, but like kind of the spammy approach just really doesn't work. If you ask an investor, what's your biggest pet peeve? Just leave it an open question. I bet 9 out of 10 will say, my biggest pet peeve is when founders contact me, it's a medical devices company or consumer products good. And clearly on our website, we say we are a fintech, growth stage venture fund. And there's a consumer products trying to sell me, a new alkaline neutral lemonade or some crap, right? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
you didn't do your homework. And investors can pick up on that instantly. So, again, it's sort of the opposite of all the good ways to do it is skipping the qualifying and research stage. I'd say another big one is once we've kicked off the fundraising is not running a really tight process. Like people who kind of half time it or part time it and put in a couple hours a week on their fundraise. And this is totally natural. I get it, right? You're a founder, you're already working crazy hours. So how are you going to squeeze in this fundraising too? Well, when people put in a couple hours a week, it never just catches fire. It never gets any momentum going. And then, is that thunder in the background?
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
That's
that is.
amazing.
There's like a thunderstorm. It was beautifully sunny when we started this podcast, and
Oh,
now there's
wow.
a
Yeah.
thunderstorm behind me. So
Good. This is emphasizing and dramatizing, how screw up your fundraise. Anyway, but really not putting in the time required, right? People who part-time it, and I've seen this happen where they're kind of getting a little bit of stuff going on, but not much, and the deal ultimately gets stale, right? Because maybe one of these investors you talk to, it's like 4 months in, they're like, so just checking in with you, how's it going? Any leads yet? And you're like, well, no, it's like there's no catalyst, there's no urgency to it. Your job as a CEO is really to get some urgency and FOMO going for your deal. So those are probably the biggest three, I'd say.
makes sense. Yeah. No, those are good ones. I've heard that like time boxing, right? You said that FOMO like is really important because, as you said, it kind of puts a little bit of pressure if you're running from one pitch to another, and it feels like there's all this interest versus spreading it out over the course of, as you said, 4 months, and you're having a couple a week or one a day, and like you end up not really being able to create this tight process that drives that. You said FOMO signals as well, right? Like
signals and FOMO. Investors, their natural state, their natural reaction is to watch and wait, right? If there's no urgency, if there's no FOMO, they will just kind of watch and wait and watch your deal. And it's super annoying to founders because like, are you interested? Can I get a yes or no from you? And they're like, well, we'd like to see some more traction. We'd like to keep in touch on the round as the round comes together. There's a lot of answers that investors will give. That's not a no, not a yes, not a no, but it's kind of like, keep me informed. And it's that optionality that investors want. Like in case Ostrich suddenly becomes the hottest deal in New York, I want to still have a foot in the door, right?
Yeah. There's no reason for them to like outright say no, right? Like it's like someone explained it's like playing poker, like you're playing Texas Hold'em. You want to wait until you see the river, right? But if you create it where it's like there's enough people that are going in and going all in on the flop or pre-flop, then and if you don't know poker, then this is probably going to go right over your head. Sorry for those that don't know poker that are listening to this. But it's like you want to wait until you see that last card so you know what's on the table.
Totally. Yep. And that's why you have to get that FOMO going so investors feel the pressure. They can't wait, right? If they're interested, they need to kind of march to your timeline. There's this beautiful moment in a fundraise where you can kind of feel the leverage shifting to your side of the court, or your side of the table. And it's intangible. It's, it when you see it. It's like hard to describe exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Love that. Nathan, what are some of the things that you've learned right throughout your journey of building Foundersuite? Like, what are some of the successes or maybe some mistakes that you've made building and you've learned from?
Yeah, I'm a solo founder. Whether that's a mistake or not, that we could debate that. I've kind of enjoyed it, but I've probably been short-sighted on things, not having a co-founder many times, right? So I'm a solo founder. I'm a finance business guy. I'm not a coder. I'm only like kind of a amateur hustler, amateur marketer. Some people are natural salespeople, marketers. I'm like learning that very slowly. I'm a finance guy trying to start a startup. So I guess there are a couple learnings there. One, maybe find a co-founder if you're in a similar scenario. I'm sure we could probably gone faster and avoided many problems, with a co-founder. Number two is like, I thought I knew what the customer wanted, right? This is like the classic rookie mistake. I thought I knew what customers wanted in the early days, all the features, the design, all that stuff. The thing I've learned over our 6 years, we're 6 years old, is, talk to customers constantly, like really let the customers sort of drive what the features should be, what your next feature should be, what they're not using, right? We've killed off products and I guess just spend more time talking to customers. So I didn't do that in the early days. I would sit there with a designer and I'd whiteboard, like, this is what I want the CRM to look like. And if you look at our first CRM, it was terrible. It was so cartoonish and all these like buttons all over the place. It was terrible. And that's because of me,
Yeah. Easy mistake to make. Yeah.
What's that?
Easy mistake to make, getting caught in the product side of it without actually talking to customers after you think you've got a solution.
And I think in the early days also, I thought, if we just had one more feature, then we'd be, there's that one more feature fallacy of like, we just need to add on this one extra thing. And that's often not the case, right? There are very few silver bullets where just adding on this one extra thing is going to like solve everything. I guess the antidote a little bit is when I hired a product manager, and I have this great product manager now that sort of sits between me and the designer and the customers and the engineers, right? And that's a really good role. I would have optimized or hired a product manager like early on, because I think we wasted a lot of time building crap no one wanted because it was in my brain. Simple as that. So, yeah. And I guess one other little mistake we did make in the early days, I hired a PR firm, and not to diss on like all PR firms, I'm sure many are awesome, but like, don't hire a PR firm until you really have a lot of news coming out of the business. I would say even wait till your B round or something. We hired this PR firm when I was like basically at the seed stage, spent all this money. They did nothing. It was terrible. It was like the biggest 50 grand I wasted. So don't do that early on.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good lesson. A good lesson. Nathan, what does success look like for Foundersuite?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's so, obviously I could give all the answers like someday we want to be acquired for lots of money. Okay. I'm not going to be shy about that, but I'm not focused on that, right? I'm focused on like, doing a good product that makes people happy. We just light up when we get our customers telling us, I love you guys. I just closed, 300K of my 500K seed round because I found some investors in whatever the scenario is. Like, that is so exciting for me to hear, because it's like someone just kind of fulfilled a dream, right? They had their own dream of a startup and they just raised some capital to like pursue that dream. It's, to me, that's like, this sounds so corny, but like, we're like dream enablers, but it's really, it feels good. I mean,
Yeah,
that sounds stupid. So that's one definition of success. Like, how many companies can we help fulfill their dreams? And then ultimately, I think that'll turn into a business that is attractive to a larger firm down the road. Simple as that.
What about on the personal level, Nathan? Like, what does success look like to you outside of, because you're not, yes, you work on the company and it's a big part of your life, but you're more than just the company that you're building. So how do you define success for yourself?
Yeah. Gosh, I feel I'm 50, so I'm on the older side for founders, and I guess you'd call it late career. I don't even know what, it's weird to think about it in those terms, but like, I'm feeling really satisfied with life. Like, I feel like I've kind of hit that success. That doesn't mean I have a 200-foot mega yacht in Nice, France, but doing what I love to do, have a startup that I love running, have a really good team and people working on it, have customers that, a few of them yell at me pretty angrily, but 9 out of 10 like are happy and make me feel good, and that's super gratifying. And we kind of got over that early, really hard first couple of years of being a startup that, is so grueling. Like, we're in a good steady state. And so I feel like that's success, right? You've got a sustainable, thriving business. we don't need to go raise more money. Like, it's kind of like I still own control of the board and most of the company. It's like it's those, all the pieces have kind of fallen into place. And frankly, we've had a few folks like reach out, sniffing around for acquisitions. And I actually get while I'm excited, like, oh boy, could we have an exit? Then the anxiety sits in, like, what would I do next? What would I do after selling this? Like, I don't think I have another good idea in me. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But like, I actually would think about a post acquisition scenario and like a little panicky about that. Like, I love pickleball and sailing, but I can't do that all day, every day. Right. And so it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question, but
there's no wrong answer, right? It's your answer. So there's no wrong answer. But Nathan, yeah, I really appreciate you sharing. This has been a lot of fun. I want to leave you with the last word. So if there's anything that you want to share with the audience, and then please let everyone know how they can connect with you outside of this podcast.
Yeah. For any startups fundraising, re-listen to the first 15, 20 minutes or so, and try and incorporate as many of those little tactics as you can. Start early, start building your target list, start connecting to and forming relationships. Even if it's a very light relationship at first, start to form some relationships. It'll pay dividends down the road when you actually, really want to turn on. So try and incorporate a bunch of those. In terms of connecting, pretty active on LinkedIn. So look up Nathan Beckord on LinkedIn. Maybe mention you heard about me on the Silicon Alley podcast, because that would be great. Love to connect. And we put out a lot of good content on LinkedIn, like lists of top 200 New York City investors and stuff like that, like Y Combinator's term sheet or safe note. Like, we put out a lot of really good content for startups. So connect with me or follow or whatever. And that would be good. And then, of course, if you want to check out Foundersuite, it's foundersuite.com. And there's a free plan. You can poke your head in there and play around with it a little bit. So
awesome. Thank you so much, Nathan. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you sharing your story and insights. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was super fun. And I hope that thunderstorm, go outside and enjoy the thunderstorm. That actually sounds kind of fun.
Yeah, I'll try not to get struck by lightning. On your way out, please share the podcast with others. It's the only way that the community grows and others hear these incredible stories from entrepreneurs and top performers. And of course, pound that subscribe button so you get notified when episodes drop every Friday. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley podcast. Have a very profitable day.
You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate. Caught in a circle saying, I'll never leave this place. Some words got you searching for the bright side over and